Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our annual public meeting. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue à notre assemblée publique annuelle. I am Chantal, the CEO of the Standards Council of Canada. Before we dive into our event, a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of the Zoom webinar window, you will see the option to have this event broadcast to you in English or French. Please select the language of your choice by clicking on the globe button. Zoom vous permet de suivre la transmission anglaise ou française du webinaire. Je vous invite à choisir la langue qui vous convient en appuyant sur le globe au bas de votre écran. If you require closed captioning, you can select this feature at the bottom of your screen, close to where you would turn on simultaneous translation. Select Show Subtitle. For today's event, we also have American Sign Language interpretation available. You can select this feature at the bottom of the screen if you wish to follow our ASL interpreter. We have many people joining us today and from different parts of the world. In Canada, acknowledging the land we gather on is an important practice. It reflects our recognition of Indigenous peoples, their enduring presence, and our shared responsibility toward reconciliation. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, and I want to begin by acknowledging that I join you from the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. As a guest, I am honored to gather here today, and I thank all the generation of Anishinaabe Algonquin people who have and continue to take care of this beautiful land. Since we also meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. To start our event today, we have a very special guest for our keynote presentation, Mr. Philip Grinsted from the World Development Bank. Each year, the World Bank publishes a flagship report, a major global publication that shapes development policy discussions by identifying key economic trends, challenges, and strategic priorities for governments worldwide. Its findings are significant because they influence national policy decisions, international development agendas, and investment strategies. The latest report highlights standardization, which is a strong signal of its importance in global economic development. It's a wonderful report, and I encourage you to read it. Philip co-authored the report. He is a private sector specialist in the trade, business, and competition team at the World Bank. He focuses on the intersection of private sector development and sustainability with expertise in green competitiveness, firm-level technology adoption, and sustainable value chains. Philip also specializes in national quality infrastructure, advising clients on standardization and quality assurance, such as testing and certification, to strengthen market access and regulatory effectiveness. We are very fortunate to have him here today with us to speak about the report. Philip, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chantal, for the warm welcome. Well, my slides hopefully going to show in a second. I'm just going to say, starting by saying, when the World Bank decided on the topic of its 2025 flagship report, Standards for Development, many asked us, especially also internally, why standards? And that might be because if standards work, you do not notice them. They're silent catalysts that make economies function and everyday life run smoothly. But when they fail, things fall apart. And it might be a little bit surprising, even though standards shape nearly all aspects of our lives, from the technology we use to the food we eat, standards are rarely part of development debates. In fact, also if you study development economics or economics as such, it would be a surprise if you'd actually learn something about standards. This is why this year's World Development Report, which is the World Bank's annual flagship report, always on a different topic, puts standards center stage. And Standards for Development is the first report to look at standards comprehensively and to show how they can guide public policy here in Canada and globally. And the report covers standards across the economy, environment, education and health, as well as the use of standards for governments themselves. But let me now share 4 key messages that matter particularly for Canada. Next slide. First, standards should not be considered a technical afterthought. They increasingly shape market access, and that's why they become more and more strategic. Next slide. And here's one very striking graph. If you look at global trade, 90% of global imports today are covered by non-tariff measures. Many of them are related to standards. And this is like not something that has been like this for a long time. If you look at 1996, the number was just 15%. For many firms, the reality today is that they're confronted with a growing web of standards and technical regulations, which might feel like a straitjacket. In the report, we actually call it a global spaghetti ball of sometimes overlapping requirements. And this is not just about standards that are used for technical. Okay, I see that. I think we might just have to switch the slides because I think we're showing the French ones. So I understand I should wait for a second. Just going to wait until the right slides are showing. Apologies for that. Maybe I can continue while the right slides are. Okay, so I see that I just get the instructions that you can actually select the right slides at the top. I believe there must be like a choice between English content screen and French content screen. So if you click on that, you will get the right one shown. So just like going back to the spaghetti ball of sometimes overlapping requirements, because if we see in this figure, this huge increase, and this is not just about mandatory standards, but we also see that private standards are becoming more and more relevant for market access, and sometimes overlapping requirements between different labels and schemes, for example. And Canada should really pay attention to this. Fragmentation increases costs for firms, especially for SMEs. And as Canada seeks to diversify trade relations and deepen its trade agreements with new partners, the alignment and coherence of standards becomes really strategic. Next slide. But standards is not of course only about regulation, but there is also a very bright spot that we highlight in the report. Our research found that firms that adopt voluntary standards grow faster and export more. So in this figure, you see firms that the revenues of firms that adopted internationally recognized quality certifications, such as ISO 9001, for example, and those that did not. And you see that across different country income levels, firms that adopt standards actually have higher revenues. And interestingly, from the perspective of the World Bank, is that the performance gap is even larger in lower and middle income countries. In other words, developing countries could potentially benefit much more from the uptake of voluntary standards, because standards really, share good practices and signal higher quality. Next slide. That's why, as I said, for Canada, which is like a trading economy, participation in international standards development is strategic, as they shape the rules of the global market. But when developing international standards, Canada has an interest that there is broad involvement of stakeholders. And there are two sides of this. One is it is better because having various views at the table makes standards better, so you can reflect like various perspectives. But then there's also the benefit of having better representation in international standards development because it gives them higher credibility internationally, and they're more likely to be adopted around the world and thereby reduce fragmentation. Next slide. And that's where we have a serious problem. If we look at who develops international standards today, it is mainly high-income countries. In fact, the numbers are really striking. High-income countries participate in 10 times as many technical committees than low-income countries. Also, they send almost 60 times as many delegates to committee meetings. So these are results that we collected in collaboration with the International Standards Organization, ISO. And we highlight that, this fact of like low representation of low and middle income countries in international standardization leads to the problem that international standards do not always fit the context of developing countries. Sometimes international standards might be too ambitious, and developing countries lack the capacity to meet them. And as you can see, like, it is not really a surprise if international standards don't fit the needs of developing countries if they were not even at the table when those standards were developed. And as I just said, like, this poses the risk of lower uptake of international standards, which is why Canada has a key interest in not only being involved in international standards development themselves, but also enabling developing countries to participate, which ultimately strengthens this international system. Next slide. That's why in the report we make two concrete recommendations that help ensure that international standards are designed to fit different capacities. One is really about supporting lower income countries to participate in international standardization. And we see that the ISO already has some programs to, of course, get more developing country voices involved, but like much more needs to happen. But then second, and this is where we want to really push the way that we think about international standards, we say maybe there's a way to design international standards in a way to match different capacities at the design stage. And we say this is like a tiered approach of having like different levels of ambitions that all are grounded in same terminology, same concepts, same ways of measuring, for example, but maybe like a different degree of ambition. And we see this, for example, working well in fuel efficiency standards, for example. And we see it would allow firms and countries to, progressively reach international standards and really like move up the chain. Third, on the next slide, sorry. Third, we really see potential that policymakers recognize standards and also quality infrastructure, which I'm going to talk about in a second, as core policy tools. And it is important to use the full toolbox. Next slide. Because if policymakers, especially those who might not be tapped into this community who's joining today, if they think about standards, many think of them as being mandatory, as being what we would say maybe command and control instruments, or you could call it a hammer. But in the report, we show that there's a whole spectrum of ways in which standards can be used for public policy. And starting on the left side of this spectrum, governments can choose to leave standards entirely to the market, not being involved at all. That can work when participants have a strong incentive to develop standards themselves, and then if there are no issues in terms of representation, for example, or competition. The second stage, maybe the government chooses to support the development of voluntary standards because the government sees the benefit of it. But maybe there's a need for the government to step in as a convener to bring everyone together where those standards wouldn't be developed otherwise. And then in this third step, we arrive more at, the interaction between voluntary standards and regulation. Voluntary standards can be a very smart policy instrument by filling the legal gaps in regulation, where regulation just, stipulates very broad goals and standards fill in the technical details. Or in the fourth step, they can be used to support other policies like market-based instruments like emission trading systems, for example. And the last one, as I said, would be more like the hammer. But we'd like to draw attention to the importance of using the full toolbox and not just the hammer. Then on the next slide. Then there's the topic of quality infrastructure. And this is maybe like not a term that is being widely used, not even in all of the standard circles, but it is really a system of public and private institutions coming together to make standards work well. So it includes a system of checks and balances. It includes standardization itself. It includes conformity assessments like testing, inspection, certification based on those standards. Then it includes accreditation, which oversees the technical competence of conformity assessment bodies. In other words, checking those who check. And then metrology underpins basically all pillars of a quality infrastructure, making sure that measurements are accurate and internationally recognized. And in the report, given that the audience is really people who do not think about standards every day, we really show that quality infrastructure is a very smart system that can be applied across many different areas. It helps not only in the economy, but it also helps protect the environment. It assures the quality of schools. If you think about accreditation of universities, for example, or it makes health centers safe. And Canada, of course, has a very mature system, but I think it is always very helpful to go back to the basics and think where are ways to improve the system, where could kind of like the uniform system of quality infrastructure be applied in areas maybe where it's not traditionally being thought of. The next slide. Lastly, standards are essential to tackle global challenges. Next slide. And it is ironic. There are more international standards in a simple bag of chips or crisps than in artificial intelligence. We've built guardrails for snacks, but for transformative technologies like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, cybersecurity, huge gaps remain. And in the report, we point to the importance of using standards to mitigate risks. And there's still a lot of room for action at the global level to really develop standards in areas that matter and where we see they are essential tools to mitigate global challenges. Last slide. Lastly, I would like to invite everyone to read the report. It is around 400 pages, but there are many different versions of it. There's also videos you can look at. There's an overview that is a shorter version. There's also a key messages two-pager. And I invite you to keep engaging with us to make sure that together we can work that standards benefit development. I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A and the discussion on the report. Thank you so much.
A big thank you, Philip, for your time and your insights. I am looking forward to the Q&A as well. Philip has mentioned it. He's staying with us, and we will make time at the end of the meeting. But in the meantime, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. So we now move to the annual public meeting part of our meeting. The Standards Council of Canada is a non-for-profit federal corporation. We report to Parliament through the Minister of Industry, Madame Mélanie Joly. As part of our reporting, we publish an annual report and host an annual public meeting to share the highlights and provide an opportunity to ask questions. We are governed by a board of directors, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. François Coallier. He's the chair of the board, and he will be sharing highlights about the work described in our most recent annual report for the year 2024 to 2025. And the title of the report is Growth and Prosperity Through Standardization. François is a full professor at the Department of Software and IT Engineering at École de Technologie Supérieure, one of Canada's leading engineering schools. He considers himself a systems engineer, having degrees in biology, engineering physics, as well as in software and IT engineering, and experience both in industry and academia. He began his contributions to standards development in 1984 as a young professional, when he began participating in the development of software engineering standards at the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE. François is currently the international chair of the ISO-IEC Joint Systems Committee on Bio-Digital Convergence. He also chairs the IEC Advisory Committee on Systems Approach. François, merci beaucoup d'être parmi nous. La parole est à toi.
Merci beaucoup, Chantal. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes et à tous. C'est un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui pour parler du travail remarquable du Conseil canadien des normes. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier le personnel du CCN, les organismes d'élaboration de normes, les membres, les organismes d'accréditation, nos partenaires fédéraux, provinciaux et territoriaux et tous nos partenaires de l'industrie. Les réussites qui s'inscrivent dans le rapport annuel sont le fruit d'une très grande collaboration entre tous les acteurs du réseau de normalisation. Le thème de cette année, la normalisation, levier de croissance et de prospérité, nous rappelle que les normes ne sont pas seulement de simples documents techniques. Elles constituent des cadres qui favorisent la croissance économique, les échanges commerciaux et l'innovation, comme Philippe l'a si bien démontré dans sa présentation. Dans un contexte d'instabilité géopolitique, d'incertitude économique, de progrès technologiques rapides et de risques climatiques croissants, le Canada doit être résilient. Et la résilience n'arrive pas par hasard. Elle exige de la coordination, de la confiance et des cadres communs qui permettent au système de fonctionner de manière efficace et sécuritaire. Et c'est là que la normalisation entre en jeu. Les normes réduisent les frictions. Elles harmonisent les attentes. Elles permettent l'interopérabilité non seulement au niveau technologique, mais aussi au niveau des processus et de l'activité économique. Et plus important encore, elles instaurent la confiance. Confiance entre partenaires commerciaux, confiance entre organismes de réglementation et industrie, confiance entre les innovateurs et le public. Au cours des dernières années, le CCN a travaillé à la fois à réduire les obstacles au commerce intérieur et à améliorer la compétitivité des entreprises canadiennes sur la scène internationale. Sur le plan national, l'une des avancées les plus importantes a été la réduction des obstacles au commerce intérieur et à la mobilité de la main-d'œuvre. Grâce au Comité consultatif des provinces et territoires, le CCN a contribué à faire progresser des accords de reconnaissance mutuelle qui facilitent la mobilité de la main-d'œuvre qualifiée entre différentes juridictions, par exemple les monteuses et monteurs d'installations au gaz. Nous avons également travaillé à une adoption plus harmonisée du Code canadien de l'électricité entre les provinces et territoires, réduisant les divergences réglementaires qui créent une complexité inutile pour les constructeurs et les entreprises. Ce sont des mesures concrètes qui visent à réduire les obstacles au commerce intérieur et à soutenir un marché canadien plus unifié. Internationally, Canada continue to demonstrate leadership in global standardization. As of March 2025, Canadian held 244 leadership roles within ISO and IEC technical committees. That presence ensures Canadian expertise shape international standards in areas critical to our economy. We also deepen our engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, supporting Canada's diversification effort. We strengthened cooperation with partners such as Mongolia in advanced new bilateral relationship, as well as other partners like the Republic of Korea. Through the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, we help promote the participation of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise in standard development, recognizing that global competitiveness depends on accessible and aligned requirements. In artificial intelligence, Canada is leading. We have played a key role in the development and launch of the world's first AI management system standard, ISO/IEC 42001. We also introduced Canada's AI accreditation program, which positioned our country at the forefront of responsible AI governance. As AI adoption accelerates, trusted frameworks will be essential to maintaining both innovation and public confidence and trust. In climate resilience and clean growth, we advanced many standardization strategies aligned with Canada's adaptation and net zero objective. We supported the publication of the Canadian Hydrogen Code and Standard Roadmap, helping to create clarity for regulators, industry, and investors. We also supported standards that modernize infrastructure planning and natural asset accounting for municipalities, which are critical to tools in an area of extreme weather and climate risk. At the same time, SEC strengthened Canada's economic security through new accreditation under the Canadian Program for Cybersecurity Certification, supporting the resilience of our defense supply chain. From a governance perspective, our council remains focused on financial sustainability, strategic alignment, and organizational effectiveness. And we continue to invest in our people and our culture. We remain committed to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. SEC was once again named one of Canada's most admired corporate culture, which reflect a high-performing collaborative organization. Standardization often works quietly in the background, but its impact is foundational, enabling growth, protecting people in Canada, and positioning our country competitively. On behalf of the Governing Council, I want to thank the CIO, the CEO, the executive team, and all SCC staff and partners for their dedication and expertise. With that, I am pleased to turn it over to our CEO, who will speak about how this strong foundation is translating into forward momentum for the organization and for Canada. Chantal?
Merci beaucoup, François, d'avoir mis en lumière nos succès de 2024 et 2025. I would like now to build on those themes and speak to how we are continuing to help advance the growth and prosperity of Canada through our work. SCC's national mandate to promote efficient and effective standardization allows us to bring the right people to the table and work together on solutions that are aligned with Canada's priorities. Our focus remains on three interconnected goals: strengthening economic unity within Canada, expanding global competitiveness and market diversification, and preparing Canada for emerging technologies and infrastructure demands. On internal trade and economic unity, the progress described by François is part of a broader commitment to reducing friction within Canada's market. We are working closely with our two advisory committees, the Standards Development Organizations Advisory Committee and the Provincial Territorial Advisory Committee, to continue to demonstrate how standardization supports regulation, and how it helps governments achieve their policy goals. In the next year, we will review the process for the development of National Standards Council, the National Standards of Canada, to ensure it keeps pace with emerging priorities and ensure it reflects the needs of federal, provincial, and territorial governments. This work directly supports the Government of Canada's One Canadian economy. Internationally, we are working hard to support government to advance trade diversification. Cooperation arrangements with international counterparts are practical tools to accomplish this. Through these arrangements, we encourage and influence the development and use of international standards and accreditation in key markets. We have renewed arrangements with Europe, the UK, Brazil, and we have signed new agreements with Ireland, Korea, Vietnam, and Sweden. We will continue to deepen our engagement with Indo-Pacific bodies, and we will continue to work closely with our partners to ensure that Canadian priorities are reflected in key trade agreements and regulatory discussions. We are also continuing to strengthen Canada's digital leadership. The launch of the ISO IEC management system standards for AI and Canada, our new AI management system accreditation program were two major milestones. Since then, we have continued to see growing engagement from organizations seeking structured and internationally aligned approaches to responsible AI. Two organizations have already been accredited under the new AI management systems program, and we are seeing strong interest from micro, small, and medium enterprises to become certified. Leaders want to understand how ISO and IEC management system standards apply in real terms and how it can help operationalize AI governance without reinventing existing processes. As organizations are on this journey, we are working on tools such as the Standardization Toolbox, which will help organizations make sure they are developing and managing advanced AI systems responsibly. This toolbox turns the government's voluntary AI code of conduct into practical questions that companies can use to check whether they have the right governance, risk management, controls, and documentation in place. This will be launched in the coming months. Coming up this fall, we will further position Canada as a leader when we host the plenary for ISO IEC Joint Technical Committee 1, Subcommittee 42 on Artificial Intelligence, and that plenary is happening in Montreal and will bring together international experts for the development of global AI standards. En matière de résilience climatique et de croissance propre, nous poursuivons nos travaux sur les normes et les outils de résilience des infrastructures afin d'appuyer les municipalités et gouvernements confrontés aux pressions attribuables au changement climatique. Quelques exemples. Nous avons lancé de nouveaux outils pour combler des lacunes de longue date, comme des normes sur la cartographie des inondations, afin de répondre aux enjeux liés à l'incohérence des données et des méthodologies de cartographie. Nous avons aussi lancé un guide sur l'interprétation de l'inclusion, de la diversité et de l'équité de l'accessibilité dans les infrastructures résilientes au changement climatique. Sur la scène internationale, le Canada détient le secrétariat du comité technique 207 de l'ISO sur le management environnemental et nous avons accueilli à Toronto l'automne dernier une plénière réunissant des participantes et participants provenant de plus de 50 pays et qui s'articulait autour du thème Innovation, Intégration, Impact. L'événement a mis l'accent sur la résilience climatique, l'intégration de technologies comme l'intelligence artificielle et les données numériques, ainsi que l'adaptation des infrastructures essentielles. Au cours de la prochaine année, nous continuerons d'aider le Canada à s'adapter aux conséquences climatiques et à promouvoir une économie verte et résiliente qui soutient le développement durable. Finalement, j'aimerais souligner que nous disposons de plus en plus de données et de recherches solides qui démontrent la valeur de la normalisation pour l'économie. C'est d'ailleurs un message mis de l'avant dans le rapport de la Banque mondiale qui appelle à renforcer les données et la recherche afin de démontrer concrètement la valeur et l'impact des normes. Nous avons publié une nouvelle recherche basée sur les données de 33 pays qui montre que les PME munies de la certification 9001, ISO 9001, une norme sur le management de la qualité, voient leur chiffre d'affaires total augmenter de près de 50% comparé à ceux qui ne sont pas certifiés. C'est énorme. La certification aide non seulement les entreprises à augmenter leurs ventes, mais aussi à réduire leurs coûts, à accéder aux marchés internationaux, à attirer des investissements étrangers et à obtenir du financement. Cette étude à grande échelle confirme également ce que nous avons observé à un niveau encore plus précis avec les entreprises canadiennes en innovation. 68% d'entre elles avec qui nous avons travaillé ont signalé une augmentation de leurs exportations, des emplois ou du chiffre d'affaires. Dans l'ensemble, ces exemples prouvent que la normalisation génère une valeur économique et commerciale réelle. Le Conseil canadien des normes publiera prochainement de nouvelles recherches liées à l'application de la norme ISO 14001 sur le management environnemental qui démontrent un lien solide avec l'amélioration de la performance environnementale, ce qui solidifie l'importance des normes pour la croissance et la durabilité. Je vous invite à rester à l'affût pour plus de détails au printemps. Standardization is not static. It evolves alongside markets, technologies, and public expectations. Our responsibility is to ensure it remains agile, responsive, credible, and strategically aligned with Canada's long-term interests. The achievements outlined in the report demonstrate momentum. The work since publication demonstrates continuity, and the path ahead requires sustained collaboration across government, industry, and the broader standardization community. Thank you to our staff, to our members, to our partners, and all of you here today. Together, we are ensuring that standardization continues to support Canada's growth, resilience, and prosperity. Now we will open the floor to questions. Please do not hesitate to ask any questions that you may have using the Q&A feature on the screen. We will aim to answer as many questions as we can. If we do not get to your question, we will follow up with you after the event. And I am now asking our Vice President Communications, Annie Roy, to join us for the question period. And I will also like to have François and Philip on the screen so we can together answer questions.
Hello, everyone. Do you see me? Oh, okay, I'm here. Okay, well, thank you, François, Chantal, and Philip should join us any moment. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate. We did receive one, so I'll read it. I'll read it now, and that first one is for Chantal. So SCC has been involved in dismantling internal barriers, as François mentioned, with provinces and territories with the gas fitter certification. And the question is, with the current shifts that we're seeing, the global shifts, how SCC will drive continue to dismantle trade barriers in Canada and strengthening our economy in the next fiscal year. So Chantal, if you can answer that one.
Yes, and thank you for a very, very good question. And I think that we have touched on the answer in both François's remarks and mine, but we are working very closely with two very important committees. They're advisory committees to our board. Those that develop standards that we accredit, so the Standards Development Organizations Advisory Committee and the Provinces and Territorial Advisory Committee. We believe that by having these two groups working more closely together, we will be able to support the reduction of internal trade barriers within Canada, because a lot of internal trade barriers are linked to what the provinces and territories decide to use, for example, for products. So having those two groups work closely together will certainly help. And we are looking at improving alignment of both the standards, but also the conformity assessment procedures. Like ideally, you want one standard, one test, one certification for the market, the entire market. And we also are reviewing the process for the development of national standards of Canada to make sure that it reflects the needs of government. So we have heard over the past few years that there seems to be a gap. And so we are working with those two advisory groups to evolve basically how we develop national standards of Canada. So we remain on top of what are the needs. And certainly we'll continue to our work on the alignment and adoption and timely adoption of the Canadian Electrical Code. That's what we're working right now on. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Chantal. We have questions coming in now. So the next one is for Philip. You mentioned gaps in AI standards. What are the most prominent ones you have noticed?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. So I have to admit, I'm of course not AI specialist. I'm sure there's other standards experts who are much better positioned. But from what we've seen is that ultimately, of course, it is up to also the industry to decide, what voluntary standards are needed. I think where we really draw attention to is the interplay between regulation and standards. And I think there's a lot of room for agreeing on shared terminologies, shared ways of assessing risks of AI systems. So I think good practice that we see evolving, and the OECD is doing some excellent work on this as well, is to really have like a risk-based approach on regulating AI. And standards can, of course, really help in making sure that those risks assessments are done properly and uniformly. And I think this is really still like an evolving field where a lot of work needs to happen. But ultimately, the gaps, I think, depend on industry need and also the respective countries' approach to regulating AI as well.
Thank you, Philip. The next one, I guess Chantal, could also be François if he wants to add anything. For people that aren't Mirror Committee members already, what is the best way for a Canadian stakeholder to participate in international standardization?
Well, I understand the question of this question as somebody that might want to join a technical committee and doesn't know how to do it. So the simplest way is to get in touch with us. We also have a newsletter that goes out regularly, so you can also register to the newsletter. In that newsletter, we often highlight which are the technical committees for which we are looking for members. But certainly, don't hesitate to connect with us. As simple as info@scc.ca, and we'll make sure to connect you with the, depending on your interest, your sector of interest, to get you in touch with the right person within SCC.
Thank you, Chantal.
Yeah, if I may add, I think joining a Mirror Committee is very important if you want to participate, because you may, through news, learn after the fact about all the new standards coming in. If you really want to contribute, you need to join a Mirror Committee, and there you have access to all the information and the work in progress, which is very important.
Thank you, François. We had a follow-up question, Chantal, when we talked about the internal trade. We spoke about what we're doing with provinces and territories. Any specific issues identified with the federal government?
So the way that we work the internal trade barriers is actually a partnership with the provinces, territories, and the federal government. we like there's a reconciliation table within the federal government, and that's where basically conversations happen around what would be of value to the country to work on. So that's where we have this conversation, and that's why we landed, for example, on gas filters or the Canadian Electrical Code. There is a sense from provinces and territories and the federal government that this would help the country, and that's how we decide. So it's not done outside of the federal government, it's done with the federal government.
Thank you. Another one for Philip. What are your thoughts on equivalencies and certification? Would you happen to know of any examples?
That's a big question. So in the report, so I think equivalencies or certification is of course one way of reducing friction, especially then in trade. So I think I always think of it in different levels. The first level is harmonization of standards. I think this is kind of like the first level where this happens. And then it's a question of equivalencies of certification. Of course, the good practice would be to go through accreditation and the international agreements that now the Global Accreditation Corporation Incorporated is managing, before that on IAF and ILAC. But one area that we do point to in the report is, of course, maybe that's part of what you focus on in your question, equivalence and certification related to private certification schemes. And this is where we have been actually working also, or like following the work, especially with, led by UNIDO, who is working on a global benchmarking platform to exactly work on those equivalencies between different private schemes. So I think this is really an absolutely essential area to work on, especially because we see that those private schemes are getting more and more widely used, and also because they're used and referenced more with regards to regulation. So I think benchmarking is one important area for ensuring equivalence, but of course, accreditation is otherwise a gold standard, I would say.
Thank you, Philip. The next one we'll go to is, I think, is for Chantal, but it's also clarifying maybe a bit our role. C'était demandé en français, donc je vais la lire. Est-ce que vous êtes responsable pour les normes qui ne sont pas dans le portefeuille du ministère d'Industrie, de Sciences et Développement économique? Et si la réponse est oui, est-ce que vous pourriez donner un exemple?
Alors, je vais répondre en français, puisque la question a été posée en français. Alors oui, le portefeuille de normes qui est développé au Canada sous l'accréditation du Conseil canadien des normes est très vaste. On a parlé aujourd'hui beaucoup d'intelligence artificielle. On peut penser à toute la question de la sécurité des produits aux consommateurs, ce qui est utilisé. On est très impliqué dans ça. Mais on est aussi beaucoup impliqué, par exemple, dans les normes sur la résilience des infrastructures au changement climatique. Ça tombe pas du tout dans le portefeuille du ministère de l'Industrie. Donc, oui, notre portfolio est très, très vaste, et avec nos partenaires, les organismes de développement de normes qui font les normes, on en couvre très, très, très large.
Merci, Chantal. And I just need to tell the audience we have many questions. So if ever we don't get time to get to your questions, we'll be answering after. But another one for Philip, since we have Philip as well. What can Canada and other high-income countries do to support the participation and uptake of standards in lower income countries?
Well, first of all, I very much appreciate the thinking of like what can be done to support the uptake of international standards in low income countries. And of course, there's a lot that is already being done. As I mentioned, the ISO, for example, has some initiatives to support countries. There is also, of course, the twinning initiatives where national standards bodies in high-income countries are linked to national standards bodies in developing countries, and there's kind of like a joint chairing of committees, of secretariats. So I think this is like there's a lot I think that needs to be recognized that is already being done. Then I think there's more that can happen. I think one is really maybe there's like three parts to it. One is sharing of expertise. I think often it is not only about the financial means of being able to participate, but it's about sharing good practices on what it takes to be effective in international standards development. I think usually it takes many, many years for experts to really understand the ins and outs of how standards are being developed. So I think this is one, sharing expertise. The other one is at the same time financial support. I think especially like traveling to in-person meetings can be expensive for developing countries. So if there's like willingness by high-income countries to work with international partners on making this easier, that is of course important. And then thirdly, I think it helps the uptake of international standards in developing countries if the systems are in place, namely the quality infrastructure, to support the implementation of those standards, because just the adoption of international standards doesn't do the job. And this is where the World Bank with international partners is actually supporting countries in developing well-functioning quality infrastructure systems. So if there's like interest also, of course, from Canada, especially the Canadian government, to work more closely with the World Bank on this, we'd be very happy to have those conversations.
Thank you, Philip. The other one for Chantal, and maybe also François, if you want to complement, what role can Canadian organizations play in initiating entirely new ISO standards in areas where Canada has strong expertise, particularly in infrastructure and major project delivery?
So we have to talk. If that's something that you believe is of great importance, of great value to Canada, we need to have a conversation about how we can make this happen, right? The way that typically work is approved at ISO is you have to make a proposal about a topic, right? You want to, let's say that you would suggest a new standard on infrastructure. The first step is to look at, is there anything else that exists in terms of standards on this? And then you have to position it within ISO and convince other colleagues that it would be of great value for the international community as well. So it's a process, and you need to gather support. But first you have to look at, is there already work being done similar in a technical committee? And if so, that you might start there. You might start by having conversations with the leadership of that technical committee to say, we think that this would be of value to the international community. Can we start working on a proposal? And then that proposal has to be approved by the technical committee, the membership, and the membership of ISO, so that work can then proceed. So I would say if you see value in this, if you think we need to have a conversation.
If I may add, when you propose new work, you may propose also to have an existing Canadian standard. We should not forget that we have standard developed in Canada, developed by many standard developing organizations that are Canadian. And some of those standards may have value to become international standard, to be internationalized. And this is much more easy when you come to, again, a colleague in a committee with a proposal, if there is what we call a base document already that's there. And that can be simply, through the proper process, be transformed, changed into an international document, an international standard. And strategically, it's very good for Canada to do that in many cases.
Thank you, François. Philippe, as countries accelerate electrification and clean energy innovation. How can the World Bank support stronger regulatory enforcement and more robust standards and conformity assessment systems to improve accountability and implementation?
Yeah, again, like an excellent question and very timely, also because the World Bank actually has an initiative called Mission 300, where the goal is to connect 300 million households to electricity. So we've actually, based on the World Development Report, started, also our internal discussions on, how can we use the findings of the report to also strengthen this mission. And again, a lot is already happening. And I think maybe just like two examples. One is what we see in a lot of developing countries. It is also about off-grid solar solutions. So these are usually very small scale systems that allow you to charge your phone, have like light at night, but it's not kind of like major system. But these are off-grid, and they're usually paid for then by the users through like a subscription model, for example, and then until they're paid off. So in here, of course, it is like very important that if especially poor households invest in such a system, they know that this is going to last, that they know that this is going to not break down, just, a month after the warranty period ends. So the World Bank has been working on, including standards and certification, making sure that these are systems that are trustworthy and reliable. And the other thing is public procurement. Again, if the government invests in electricity systems, to really make sure that standards are uniformly used and robust quality infrastructure is used, that those systems that the government invests in are going to be there to generate electricity, for as long as they can. And there's interesting work going on that. I'm happy to provide more details afterwards as well.
Thank you. And we are coming at time. So I just wanted to mention to people will be getting back to you after. If you if you haven't put your email, please make sure you send it with your question. And we'll end on a question, Chantal, which is a good segue, I think, to close the meeting, which was if we had any update on the work we're doing on gender responsive standards. So passing back to you.
Thank you very much, Annie, and thanks for the question. So I would say two important things. We have been leading this conversation at the international level and proposing tools for the standardization community to make sure that, and we did this based on the research we've done that demonstrates that the more a country uses standardization, the more male are protected, but it's not the same outcome for female. That's why we've been so involved. So we're pushing for making sure that safety happens to everybody touched by a standard. So at the international level, we've been leading this work and developing tools. And in the domestic sphere in Canada, what we are working with the Standards Development Organization we accredit is to ensure that in Canada we do the same thing. So this is a journey, because you should know that in many cases, standards are based on data that were only collected on males, right? Think about cars, safety of cars and seatbelts. All the data and the testing has been done on a European male-sized person, right? So it's a journey, right? We have to take into consideration how we can modify that going forward. But in Canada, we're also working diligently with the standards development organizations to find a better place and a better way forward to ensure that that the standards that end up being developed for Canada are protective for everybody, not just for males. That's it, Annie. I guess
Chantal,
we're at
yes.
time. Okay,
Yes,
so
we're at.
I'll just say just big thank you to everyone that participated. Thank you for attending. Thanks for all the questions. If you are interested in exploring an area of standardization that is not familiar to you, or if you have yet to participate in Canada's Standardization Network, please get involved. Visit our website, connect with us on social media through LinkedIn to join our community. We're very much looking forward to celebrating International Women's Day next month. We will use that as an opportunity to highlight our successes on gender responsive and standards, and to launch also our new gender strategy. Please stay tuned for our updates on our website and social media. Again, if anything else comes to mind, do not hesitate. Submit your questions to info@scc.ccn.ca. Je vous souhaite une très belle fin d'après-midi. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you, everyone.